In our next conversation, we're going to talk about startup cities, the post-pandemic reboot. We're going to talk about how can cities restart the engine of economic growth. Our speakers are Mohamed Alabbar, founder of Emaar Properties. We also have Zhang, co-founder and chief executive officer of SOHO China. And the moderator will be Jonathan Woetzel, Global Institute Director and Senior Partner, Shanghai McKinsey & Company. Jonathan, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. And look forward to this conversation about cities in the post-COVID context, rebooting for a new growth era. And with me are two developers who have built cities, who have been part of the tremendous growth story of emerging markets. Only appropriate for the New Economy Forum to have this chance to talk to Xin and Mr. Alabbar about their progress and what they see. So I'm going to start perhaps actually with you, Xin. We've seen SOHO over the years become almost the standard for aspiring Chinese people to live in the city, and then all of a sudden we had this. We had COVID. And now, as we were just hearing from Zhang, we're out of it. I mean, China is back. So maybe we could just start with a bit of your take on what happened, and are we in fact back in China? What happened to the city? What happened to the buildings? What happened to the people in the buildings over the last, let's say, over this year, over the 2020? Mm-hmm.
Sure. When the virus first broke out in China, it was, scary. The whole cities and the whole country was shut down. But remember, we had SARS a while ago, so I think China was better prepared for the crisis, as people kind of knew what it was like to be locked down, and knew what it was like to wear masks, knew what it was like to stay inside. So we saw the cities were completely quiet. There was like hardly anybody was on the streets. And the first quarter was that way. And then second quarter, I think around May, we started seeing people going back to work. And it was still very limited. When in the beginning of going back to work, we were also worried about how do we make sure that people coming to the buildings are safe. So we put infrared cameras in every entrance of the buildings and making sure that anyone who comes in were body temperature checked. And so, it was, and then, China had this health QR code. So then we were checking everybody's QR code. So let me just explain the QR code. Everyone has been given a QR code. So you have it on your cell phone. And if you have a green, that means you're healthy, you can go anywhere. If you are orange, that means you had a history. And then if you're red, you really should be quarantining or in a hospital. So that was very helpful in terms of tracing and identifying who potentially has had the health problem. And I think with that, with the tracing, with all that technology, we'll very quickly see that the buildings were back to, quickly went back to the 70%. Pre-COVID buildings were all 95% occupied. Then we went down to 0, then we went up to 50%. And probably by middle of this year, we saw like 70% went up. But restaurants were still really careful. Then, people were still careful not to go to restaurant to eat. So retail continued to suffer. And then really what we saw a complete comeback was October. And the first week of October, China had the national holiday when, hotels are fully booked, restaurants are fully booked, and everywhere there's like people. So by now we're actually seeing all the buildings back to pre-COVID level of mid-90s occupancy. And even though China has no COVID really, we're still seeing, you see it on the street that half of the people are still wearing masks. And I think, but in terms of back to work is really, everything is back to normal now.
Well, I mean, that's an encouraging picture, and I want to come back to you in terms of what might be different in terms of how work is done and other aspects. But perhaps I could first turn to you, Mr. Alabbar, and sort of, is that the picture that we see as well in Dubai and the Emirates and the region? Or I mean, you cover so many areas in terms of growth. How have you seen this develop? And then also, what is your outlook in the sense of when will it come back?
Well, I think we all can agree on one thing, that this is really an attack on humanity. I mean, call it whatever you want to call it, but this is just so strange. It's so large, devastating. Of course, let me tell you one thing first: is that when this happened, we really didn't know what to do. We were scared, and I probably respect a lot of CEOs who knew what to do. We didn't know what to do. If you're, as an organization, if your balance sheet is not right, if you don't have the right talent, if you don't have the right company, if you are not planning way ahead, you are really in big trouble. When it comes to, we operate across 14 countries and across different, I have the real estate business, I have my large e-commerce platform in the Middle East, and I do have my very large food business. But in summary, I would say the following. The great learning for me is that during this unfortunate event, government have really shown their quality. And one of the things that really I'm starting to understand is that leadership in this is so critical. You've got, unfortunately, leadership in China, I think part of Europe, and you've got America, where thank God they only have two political parties. Not more. They are fighting each other while Americans are getting sick. More people are dying, and the fight is going on. That is one agony. The second agony, worldwide, you've got the poor getting poorer. The poor is losing their jobs while stock market is rocketing. Okay, I'm a businessman. I have 200,000 people working for me. But this is something that hits me in the face as a result of the virus. The effect on the lower income, mid-income, lower income people is catastrophic. And that really worries me as a businessman. It's not all, it's not all about, okay, will I survive during this crisis? What's happened to the society around me? Because I survive with society, and we have social responsibilities. So I'm asking all of us, is that what does this all mean for the people who can't get health care? Again, does it mean that privatization have failed? Because, we all keep talking about privatization, but does privatization mean we can privatize healthcare where people don't have enough coverage like America, while a country like UAE and Egypt, the military have came in, took over, built hospitals on site, while there is a lot of government hospital, and that's what happened in China. So I guess who is right, who is wrong? I'm not saying we are right, you are wrong, but, we need to think again. But this is the fact of life. Change is the way we live, if it's technology or it's the environment or if it's political instability or terrorism. And this is the largest, I guess, event, or I call it attack on humanity that we've all seen. And I hope, I hope within 9 months, 12 months, we're in a better position.
Unquestionably, it is the actually largest economic shock since World War II. So I think that's absolutely factually correct. And so I hear you saying that it's the response that made the difference. And so I'm curious if I could keep going on this then, as to what's the next thing then? What is the next element of that response? Or what, again, back to you, Mr. Alabbar, sort of as you see governments and the private sector in the region, what do you see as the priority for this next 6 to 12 months? Is it the economics? Is it the health? Is it other technology and innovation? Is it all of that? I'm just, what do you see happening next?
I think it's very simple. It's purely health, because it's the base of everything. Health is fine, then, tourism is there, business activities are there. So what, for example, what the UAE have done is that even though they opened up the country, but they tripled down on testing. they have not stopped. In fact, instead of 50,000 a day for the size of our country, now we're about 150,000 testing a day. Still watching the environment, still everything's on standby. So I would say that doubling down on health and doubling down on containing the virus, what makes our shopping malls are doing well, relatively restaurants are doing well. I think some businesses are relatively doing well. Of course, some businesses are not doing well. I mean, the tourism industry and travel is suffering a lot.
Well, then health comes first. Now, back to you, Shin. I mean, I'd be interested, first of all, I said I was going to come back to say what actually is different in China, if anything, not just in the way to work, but in, for example, retail. You have SOHO is well known for having a lot of very high-end or mixed-use developments. How have habits changed? And then, yes, what's happening next? And I want to remind the audience, there's actually a poll question, which is essentially that question. So please do take a look and vote, and we'll come back to that. We'll hear what the audience thinks in a bit. But back to you, Shin. Just some thoughts on the future.
But I think we're going to look back in this horrible crisis that the biggest winner in this pandemic is technology. So we are seeing that technology, if things are already happening with a technological disruption, and it just, the COVID has made it even faster. For instance, retail. We already were seeing that retail are suffering, physical retail, because more and more people have moved online for shopping. And this pandemic has really speeded up the whole process, has made retail that much, decline that much faster. And even my, 83-year-old mother, who's now very used to doing shopping online. So that, I think, is just, we will see that after the COVID, as we're already seeing in China, that I think office, people will go back to work in the office. People will go back to live in the city, but people will shop very differently. So the retail scene is very different. We have to rethink about what do we do with all the retail space there. So many shopping malls are built, so many shopping streets are built, and with more and more people move to online shopping, then what would happen to our retail space? That's a question for cities and developers who build a lot of retail.
With all of that technology acceleration, what happens to the people? I'm just curious, do you see any change in densities in how people are moving around within your developments, and also to your own companies in terms of the real estate sector itself? Is this technology acceleration, is it going to change people?
I mean, I think people's technology is changing, every corner of our life. But generally speaking, I haven't really seen the fundamental change in people's living. Like, people still live more or less the same way and work more or less the same way. I see that, still move around the same way in the cities or between cities. But really the one area I see that obviously this is still the early stage of technology that will continue to develop. The other day we're talking about, will people start seeing buildings, buying properties online? I haven't seen that yet. I mean, I know there's a lot of technology coming up to assist the online touring of properties, but it hasn't quite happened that the property transaction and the buying of the properties and moved online. Not yet.
So it's more of an acceleration, but less of a fundamental change. And with that, I wanted to welcome Mayor Bottoms. Thank you, Mayor, for joining us. And it's a pleasure. So we are in the midst of discussing kind of where we are in the life of the city as we've had it in this incredible 2020, and what's coming next. And in terms of priorities, maybe I could just go directly to where you are. And you launched an economic mobility plan in the middle of a pandemic. And so I would love to know more about why you did that. Why was that the priority? And how do you think that plays out over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, thank you for the question, and it's great to join you all. I mean, it's been extremely important to have priorities during this time. Like so many people, what we're faced with is navigating the unknown right now. And what we found over the last several months, again, like so many entities across the world have experienced, is that there's been this huge distraction. For us, it was COVID-19 and then the social unrest that we saw across our cities. It made it more important than ever for us to focus in on what our priorities were, what were our goals. So we had been working on an economic mobility plan. We had been working on an affordable housing plan. But with the social protest and also with COVID-19, became important for the community to see that we were doing this work, not just behind the walls of City Hall, but for us to show and give tangible evidence that in the midst of all of the disruptions that we were experiencing with our day-to-day lives, that we were still focused on our goals. And in Atlanta, that is equity. And it also helped us to not only deal with what we are confronting in the present, but really to give us a roadmap as to how we will continue to address these issues going forward. Because what we know, even with the vaccine, with COVID-19, for example, there's still going to be, beyond the physical recovery for us, there's still going to be a huge economic recovery that's likely to linger for many years. And that's why it was important for us to be able in a tangible way to show that to our communities.
Then, because the economic mobility plan, as I understand it, was started actually, of course, before the pandemic. So how have your goals changed, if at all, in the course of what has unfolded over the last 3 or 4 months? Are they the same? Or are they maybe even higher?
Well, the goals are still the same, but I would think the biggest change has probably been the expectation of the number of people throughout our communities that will have to take advantage of this economic mobility plan. Because when we embarked upon this plan, obviously we weren't in the midst of COVID-19. And so we were looking at a smaller sector of our city. But with COVID-19, we have to expect that this economic mobility plan is going to be relevant to many more people who didn't expect to see themselves in this position. And it's the reason why, even aside from this economic mobility plan, we've tried to put structures in place through Invest Atlanta, our economic development arm, to make it easier for people to access grants, to access small loan funds, so that they aren't dependent just upon the federal government and all of the red tape and bureaucracy that entails, and that there is someone in a place in the space locally that they can contact and be able to navigate resources to help their businesses and in many ways their households to be able to survive COVID-19.
Yeah, well, I think that, first of all, it's incredibly encouraging to hear that focus on growth and employment. And in the context of startup cities, maybe I'm going to ask a question to everybody. And again, back to you to start, perhaps, Mayor Bottoms, is where do you see those green shoots of opportunity? I mean, where will the startup cities start up? Are there particular sectors or neighborhoods, or what's the development concept that you think, given where we are right now, brings us back?
So it's interesting, even in the city of Atlanta, when you think of essential employment, there is that basic employment that even in the midst of where we are with COVID-19, we're still advertising for jobs in the city of Atlanta. Many of them are blue collar jobs, but on the other end of the spectrum, technology is a huge sector in our city. And what we're seeing, obviously, with so many people teleworking and so many kids having to go to school virtually, I believe we'll continue to see success and growth in that area. Because I know everyone in my household right now is connected to a device, either out of necessity or out of pleasure throughout the day. And with the Atlanta University Center, Georgia Tech, and so many other big institutions in Atlanta, we've had a great opportunity to be able to retain and retain and attract people in the areas of technology. And we expect we'll continue to see that grow.
That's great. Mr. Alabbar, is that the same picture you see in the region? Is it the technology focused sectors that are going to be the growth opportunities here?
Well, because in the Middle East, remember, out of the 400 million people, 50% are below the age of 28. So of course technology is there, but I would say that all sectors of the economy are really being touched by the young people. But the base of everything is good education that we need. And then again, if we have good education, we have good talent, are we able to keep them in our cities? Is the environment good enough for them to have a great challenge, great job opportunities? You've got safety, you've got healthcare, quality of life, which is really critical for people in the Middle East. And that's why you have a city like Dubai that the Middle East just flies to. And again, great universities, safe, amazing healthcare, beautiful infrastructure. In fact, the whole country, the UAE, and that's happening in Abu Dhabi as well. So much is happening on the field of healthcare and education and soft infrastructure, hard infrastructure. So I think the combination of all, you need all that for it to work. And I know great cities that really have failed the test of COVID, for example. And you find a lot of people leaving these cities. I hope they go and fix that. So you need all of the above for these cities to prosper and create these industries and young industries to grow.
But I hear you saying that a lot of it, in the case of the UAE, will be dependent on flow, in the sense that rebuilding that regional flow for all sorts of services, healthcare, education, tourism, so making it safe. Is that fair to say that's where you see the opportunity for renewing the growth?
Well, I would say that that's a critical requirement while we are going through what we are going through. But then that's only the beginning. Is the place safe? Is the infrastructure good? Is the government really promoting small, medium-sized enterprises? Are the regulation really kind and soft to help people? Are there great universities available? And in UAE, really, and you've got amazing institutions on the government side in education and healthcare. And as I said, really the pandemic have proven that UAE's leadership is very serious about managing its affair. But the healthcare is only one side of it.
Well, Shin, if I could turn to you, I mean, where do you see the big investments now as in Chinese cities? Has the growth model changed, or where I don't want to say hotspots because that sort of has multiple meanings, but where are the growth opportunities that you see, particularly as it reflects in the real estate sector? Mm-hmm.
So I think what we have seen in the past 20 years in China is where the highest growth happened is where there was the highest density of population, which is quite different. It's the opposite of what we're seeing with the pandemic. With the pandemic, people are leaving the cities and going outside of the cities and to avoid high density. But after COVID, when virus is gone, what drives the growth is still where there's a high density of population, there's a high density of human knowledge, and that's where technology drives, that's where all the knowledge drives, and that's where the growth happens. And I don't see that changes. And, I still see that, after this horrible virus goes away, that people still want to be living in a very dense city where there's a lot of opportunities, there are a lot of ideas, new ideas, a lot of innovations. I see, China, if you look at where are the highest growth cities in China, those are almost always the highest density populated cities.
And when we say density means different things to different people. Some people imagine, Manhattan and Wall Street. Other people think of a 3-story building in Paris. What kind of density are we talking about here?
I mean, China obviously has a different scale, right? We're talking about 20 million people population as a high density cities. You look at Beijing, Shanghai. These are all more than 20 million people then population cities, and they continue to drive the growth.
All right. So it is about scale in that sense, that they're bigger does lead to better. I think our poll is back, incidentally, it's complete. We have the audience's view. I don't know whether we can show that now. Let's take a quick look. So, right, in terms of, so the question was, what should we invest in first? In other words, the next wave of growth. And I think, yeah, a bit of a consensus around infrastructure and job creation. So the infrastructure side is a bit interesting. Maybe we come back to that. Health right up there. So quite a split group, I have to say. Maybe I can come back to you, Mayor Bottoms. I mean, I think that we just heard this discussion about a little bit about scale and also about the importance of connectivity in the face of COVID. How does that play out for Atlanta? I mean, Atlanta is well known for being a fairly large region, so a lot of growth and many different transit authorities and so forth. How do you think about connecting Atlanta in the context of coming back from COVID?
Well, obviously, something that's been at the top of our minds lately has been the digital connectivity. And what we've seen for as progressive of a city as Atlanta is, and it's a world-class city, COVID really has exposed a lot of those gaps, meaning we've seen many of our kids in many of our communities that don't have digital connectivity. They don't have Wi-Fi in the home. So thankfully, we've been able to partner with a number of our technology companies to make sure that people have that basic connectivity that so many of us take for granted. And then, transportation and infrastructure, always big conversations in Atlanta with Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, with our mass transit system. But it really has caused us to take a step back in both those areas as well. When you look at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, one of our largest job centers in the state, we know that our airline industry is not where we are accustomed to it being. So we've had to make a lot of economic adjustments in that area and giving relief to many of our small business owners and minority business owners there. And then even with our transportation planning and our infrastructure planning, where are the needs right now? So the silver lining, many of our infrastructure projects that were underway, we've been able to make a lot of progress in those areas because people aren't out and traffic is not as bad as it normally is. So it's allowed us to get ahead of the curve in many ways. But on the other side of that, we're having to rethink our bonding capacity and how do we go out to the bond market and make sure that we can pay our bills to be able to fund these infrastructure projects. So it's given us a lot of things to have to consider. The pros, we've tried to take advantage of them, but certainly being cognizant of the cons, and many of that's economic related.
Well, Mayor Bottoms, you're on the panel with two world-class developers. So I guess I'm going to ask the question that in the line with this infrastructure initiative, what are some of your thoughts about how that translates into development, and by that also recognizing development for the whole city, and so not just the premium end, but to meet, for example, your affordable housing goals, to spur that technology sector growth. Does the COVID silver lining apply? Will that accelerated infrastructure delivery translate into additional transit-oriented developments, for example?
So that's a great question, because what we don't know is what's going to happen to our real estate market. We have many of our largest job centers throughout Metro Atlanta that aren't open right now. I was eavesdropping on the conversation with my husband the other day with his team. He works with a large company that's headquartered here. It's going to be a couple of months before they go back into their building. So that's going to be the interesting part. But meanwhile, the housing piece remains. So affordable housing has been a challenge in Atlanta. We're not as burdened as many other major cities are. So we still have an opportunity to address our challenges. Our goal was $1 billion in investment, $500 million public funding, $500 million private funding, creating or preserving 26,000 affordable housing units by the year of 2026. We're already about 5,000 in. So that goal remains, and it won't go away, because no matter what our transit-oriented development calls for, there's still going to be a need for affordable and workforce housing in Atlanta. But I think certainly the opportunity to take advantage of that around many of our transit centers, we can accomplish both.
That again is an inspiring note. Now, Mr. Alabbar, do you see the same COVID silver lining? I know you are also, as you mentioned, the chair of an e-commerce group, and I just saw that you've introduced autonomous vehicles into UA in the autonomity. I can't pronounce it, but do you see the same opportunity?
Well, let me go back to social housing, because this is something that's close to my heart, and because I come from social housing, and I think Leeds is trying to do its bit, but that's a subject that I really spend a lot of time on, and in Egypt we have really an amazing example where the market allows us that for every home we sell, we build one social house. And I guess, we're not going to solve the whole problem, but I really think that we can help 2,000 families a year. That's an amazing opportunity. I think in Atlanta, I'm sure they have better rules when it comes to whatever X percentage of development have to go for social housing of any building permits. That's also something that's really quite important. But if you allow me also to just come back to one very important point, I hope it will also answer your question. That I truly believe, as a person who live on both sides of, I live the digital life and I live the physical life. I mean, nothing better than concrete and aluminium and e-commerce. I truly believe that life will go back to normal. I believe that I don't think we're going to have a lot of big damage to shopping malls. In America, there is a damage because there is overbuilt situation. It's completely different than the rest of the world. I think human beings want to live life. I believe in big cities. So, for me in the Middle East, Cairo, 22 million people is my big city, and it's doing very well. I think a city like one of the cities I do business with is Karachi. Karachi is also close to 18 million people. I do business in Bombay, which is 20 million people. So, but Dubai is dense when you talk about 2 million people. So I truly believe that we'll pass, and we'll conquer this virus. And I believe that life will come back. I know digitization have been speeded up, which is good, but I really think that human nature is human nature. And I really think this will make us fitter, will make us better society, better government, better people for the years to come.
I'm encouraged, and I'm personally a believer in the idea of augmentation, that it's not an either or, it's an and so we become more human, not less, as we acquire capabilities. But Shin, you have the last word. Is there a COVID silver lining for you?
Well, I really think that COVID has showed us what technology can do in a very positive way. That before COVID, we did not know that we can actually work so effectively on Zoom. We did not know that we can actually have a global conference on digital. And this is all something that technology has showed us what it can do. But I think in the end of the day, after COVID, we humans still crave to be with other humans. New ideas and new concepts can only come not when we're alone, when we're together. So I think that the after COVID world would still be, we are, we're in person, we're meeting a lot. We're still going to go back to having in-person conferences. So we're still going to go back to office. We're still going to go back to live in the city. And that I don't think has changed.
Well, I mean, and as a good friend of mine says, the technology makes us more human, because the technology helps us to achieve that more human interface in spite of all of these challenges. So I want to thank all of you. I think it's a great panel. I hope that everybody keeps in touch, because I actually feel there's a lot of benefit from this conversation. So thank you all, and thank you to Bloomberg.